Do you remember those last-minute Halloween treats that made every 70s kid light up with sugar and excitement? They were the quick, sticky creations whipped up in home kitchens just before the doorbell rang. How did something so simple leave memories that sweet for so long? Popcorn balls were the true taste of Halloween chaos wrapped in butter and sugar. You poured hot syrup over a bowl of plain popcorn, stirred until your arms ached, and rolled the sticky mess into glowing golden balls. Every house smelled like caramelized sweetness and salt. Kids would line up with greasy hands, holding wax paper squares to keep from burning their fingers. It was a family effort, parents working the pot, kids pressing the popcorn into shape, laughter cutting through the sound of crackling kernels. When the balls cooled, they were glossy, firm, and just a little dangerous to bite. They stuck to your teeth, pulled at your cheeks, and left you reaching for more. Wrapped in plastic or wax paper, they filled treat bags across the block. They were messy, imperfect, and made with real work, which made them even better. Each bite was a crunchy mix of home, chaos, and candy. Popcorn balls were Halloween made by hand, the kind that left you sticky but smiling long after the doorbell stopped ringing. Rice Krispies marshmallow squares were a miracle of convenience and taste. All you needed was butter, marshmallows, and cereal, the holy trinity of fast treats. Moms melted marshmallows on the stove, stirred in the Rice Krispies, and pressed the sticky mixture into pans while kids hovered impatiently nearby. The smell of butter and sugar filled every corner of the kitchen. They were soft at first, chewy after cooling, and snapped perfectly when you bit in. They looked plain but sparkled in their simplicity. No frosting, no decoration, just sweet golden joy. Some kids added candy bits or drizzled chocolate on top, but the classic version was always king. They showed up at every school party and neighborhood potluck, sometimes wrapped in foil, sometimes stacked in Tupperware that no one ever got back. Cheap, quick, and foolproof, these treats felt like magic pulled from thin air. The marshmallow squares became the trademark of the 70s mom ingenuity, sweetness born from whatever was in the pantry. Caramel apples were both a delight and a dare. You started with crisp green apples, skewered on wooden sticks, dipped into a pan of molten caramel that glistened like amber glass. The air smelled of sugar and spice, and the moment they cooled, the trouble began. They were sticky, glossy, and stubborn. Your teeth fought them, your fingers glued together, but no one cared. They were the centerpiece of every Halloween fair and school carnival. Sometimes they came rolled in crushed nuts, sometimes left plain and perfect. They were messy, unapologetic, and absolutely worth it. Parents wrapped them in cellophane, tied with ribbons, and handed them out like edible trophies. The sound of that first crack, when your teeth broke the caramel shell, was pure satisfaction. Kids licked caramel off their hands, faces, even elbows, laughing while trying to finish before the apple hit the floor. They were part candy, part memory, and completely irresistible. Chocolate-dipped marshmallows on sticks turned simplicity into celebration. A bag of marshmallows, a bar of chocolate, and a handful of sprinkles were all you needed. You melted the chocolate slowly, dipped the marshmallows one by one, and lined them up to cool on wax paper. Each one became a small piece of Halloween art, shiny, sweet, and full of charm. Parents made them the night before parties, letting kids decorate them with crushed candy or colored sugar. They were bright, festive, and surprisingly elegant for something made from pantry leftovers. Kids waved them around like candy wands, sticky fingers leaving chocolate fingerprints on everything. You could make dozens in under an hour, perfect for last-minute gatherings or trick-or-treat swaps. They tasted like every good part of childhood, soft, sugary, and just a bit over the top. A bite meant chocolate cracked, marshmallow squished, and smiles followed. It was fun disguised as food, a Halloween staple that never needed perfection to be adored. Peanut butter cornflake clusters were where thrift met genius. A pot of peanut butter, corn syrup, and sugar turned humble cereal into chewy gold. You stirred until the mixture bubbled, then poured it over cornflakes, mixing fast before it hardened. Sticky, sweet, and crunchy, they were shaped by hand into little mounds that looked like sunshine. Kids loved them because they stuck to their fingers, and parents loved them because they used what was already in the pantry. They hardened just enough to keep their shape, the perfect bite of sweet and salt. Wrapped in wax paper or stacked in tins, they disappeared faster than anything else on the table. They were a staple at Halloween parties, easy to make between costumes and candy runs. Some added chocolate chips or drizzles, but even plain, they hit every craving. Cornflake clusters were proof that even the simplest ingredients could taste like celebration. They were quick, clever, and full of crunch. Homemade candy for people who did not need a recipe to make something right. Witch hat cookies were a tiny piece of Halloween magic you could make in minutes. You started with fudge-striped cookies, pressed a Hershey's Kiss on top, and sealed it with a ring of orange frosting. Suddenly, you had a witch's hat. Cute, sweet, and completely snackable. Parents made them for school parties or trick-or-treat trays when time was running out. They were colorful, easy, and impossible to mess up. The chocolate melted slightly, blending the cookie and candy into one bite of sugar and nostalgia. Kids loved decorating them, smearing icing everywhere while sneaking kisses into their mouths. Each hat looked a little different, but that only made them more charming. They were the kind of treat that came together in a hurry, but still felt special. Halloween in the 70s was about that. Fun without the fuss, laughter over perfection. Witch hat cookies captured that spirit perfectly, a sweet reminder that joy could be made in 10 minutes flat. Pumpkin-shaped sugar cookies were pure joy dressed in frosting. You rolled out the dough from a boxed mix, cut it with pumpkin-shaped cutters, and baked until golden at the edges. The kitchen filled with that warm, buttery smell that every kid recognized instantly. Once they cooled, the fun began. Thick orange frosting, green stems, and wild little smiles drawn with black icing. Every cookie looked like it came from a different pumpkin patch. They were messy, bright, and absolutely perfect. Kids decorated them with full concentration, tongues sticking out, hands covered in sugar. They tasted like childhood, soft, sweet, and slightly crisp on the edges. Parents loved them because they were easy. Kids loved them because they were theirs. The counter turned into a rainbow of frosting bowls and crumbs. Even after the cookies were gone, the smell lingered, cozy and happy. They were Halloween joy in edible form, the kind of treat that never lasted long enough. Candy corn bark was Halloween's leftover miracle. You melted chocolate, spread it flat on a baking sheet, and threw in whatever candy you had left. Candy corn, pretzels, peanuts, marshmallows, even cereal bits. Once it hardened, you broke it into chunks that looked chaotic and perfect all at once. It was colorful, crunchy, and full of surprises with every bite. Parents made it when they wanted to clean out the candy bowl but still give the kids something new. It was sweet, salty, and endlessly forgiving. You could not mess it up if you tried. Kids loved the colors, the crunch, and the excuse to eat candy twice in one day. It looked fancy enough for parties but came from pure thrift and fun. Candy corn bark was the definition of 70s kitchen creativity, turning leftovers into celebration. A treat for everyone, made from whatever sweetness the night had left behind. Jello jigglers were the wobbly wonder of every Halloween party. You mixed up packets of gelatin, poured them into Halloween molds, and waited for the fridge to work its magic. When they popped out, they shined like little jewels, orange pumpkins, green bats, purple ghosts. Kids poked, squished, and giggled before eating them, half playing, half snacking. They were sweet, slippery, and impossible not to smile at. Parents loved them because they were cheap and quick to make, a rare treat that was both clean and fun. You could line them up on trays, bright and jiggly like edible toys. The 70s loved their gelatin, and this was its finest hour. Jello jigglers made every table look like a party, even if the decorations were just paper streamers and store candy. A little water, a packet, and patience. That was all it took to make joy jiggle. Peanut butter fudge squares were the last-minute miracle every mom kept in her recipe box. You melted peanut butter, butter, and powdered sugar in a saucepan until it came together smooth and shiny. It was rich, creamy, and sweet enough to make you forget how fast it was made. Once poured into a dish and chilled, it cut cleanly into neat little squares that melted in your mouth. They tasted like the candy store but came from the stovetop. Kids fought over corner pieces, the ones with the extra bit of firm chew. Parents served it on paper plates with punch or tucked a piece into lunchboxes for later. The smell alone could pull neighbors through the door. It was comfort disguised as candy, a sweet born of thrift and timing. Peanut butter fudge squares were proof that homemade did not mean hard. It just meant made with love. Popcorn trail mix was the kind of Halloween treat that brought sweet and salty together like best friends. You started with a bowl of plain popcorn, tossed in candy corn and peanuts, and poured melted butter over the top until everything glistened. It stuck lightly to your fingers, crunchy and sticky in the best way. The candy corn melted just enough to coat the popcorn with color, little flashes of orange and yellow glowing like tiny lights. Parents made it by the handful for parties, packing it into plastic bags or paper cups for kids to grab on their way out. It was noisy to eat, fun to share, and impossible to stop munching once you started. Every bite was a surprise, some sweet, some salty, all delicious. It was simple, chaotic, and perfect for the season. In the 70s, this was the kind of snack that showed up everywhere: living rooms, classrooms, and trick-or-treat tables lined with plastic pumpkins. It was Halloween flavor without the fuss, quick enough to make in a hurry and good enough to disappear fast. Monsterface cupcakes were the masterpiece of every hurried Halloween mom. A box of yellow cake mix, a few tubs of frosting, and a handful of candy turned into an edible art project. Once the cupcakes cooled, the real fun began. Kids got spoons, plastic knives, and an explosion of food coloring to create their sugary monsters. Gummy worms became mouths, candy buttons turned into wild eyes, and licorice laces doubled as creepy hair. No two monsters ever looked the same. Some funny, some scary, all covered in way too much frosting. The table always ended up a colorful mess, laughter echoing through the room. Parents pretended to supervise but mostly joined in, licking frosting off their fingers. They were the perfect last-minute dessert. No perfection needed, only imagination. The cupcakes became more than food. They were memories with sprinkles. They may have looked monstrous, but they tasted like childhood. Cereal mix graveyard bars were the kind of treat that blurred the line between candy and playtime. You melted marshmallows in a pot, stirred in cereal until it clumped together, then pressed the mix into a pan to cool. The magic came afterward. Kids covered the top with crushed chocolate cookies for dirt, tucked gummy worms halfway in, and sometimes stuck candy bones on top. Each pan looked like a tiny graveyard, spooky but sweet. The marshmallows held it all together in sticky perfection, chewy and light at once. Parents cut them into squares that stuck slightly to your fingers and stretched when you pulled them apart. They were easy, funny, and full of sugar-fueled imagination. Every bite tasted like Saturday morning cartoons meeting Halloween night. Cheap, cheerful, and always homemade, these bars proved that creativity could feed a crowd. They were scary in name only. The real fright was how fast they disappeared. M&M cookie bars were a burst of color and comfort on a baking sheet. You took a basic chocolate chip cookie recipe, poured the dough into a pan, and scattered bright candies across the top like tiny jewels. As they baked, the colors softened and sank into the golden dough, creating cheerful little mosaics of chocolate. The smell was pure happiness. Sugar, butter, and melted candy all blending together. When cooled, the bars sliced clean but crumbly, perfect for wrapping in foil or stacking on a tray. Parents loved how easy they were. Kids loved how fun they looked. You could bake a full batch in half an hour and feed a dozen hungry trick-or-treaters. They were simple but never boring, warm enough to make the whole house feel alive. M&M cookie bars were a 70s staple, bright, quick, and gone before you knew it. Butterscotch haystacks were the golden treasure of quick Halloween afternoons, sweet and shiny and full of crunch. You melted butterscotch chips in a pot, the smell filling the kitchen with that rich caramel scent that clung to the air. Then came the chow mein noodles, odd little sticks that somehow turned into candy once they were covered in melted gold. You stirred fast before it hardened, dropping spoonfuls onto wax paper, each one a messy masterpiece. They cooled into crisp, glossy clusters that looked like tiny hay piles left behind by some candy-loving scarecrow. Kids called them witch nests, monster nests, or just the best thing on the table. Parents made them between chores, quick enough to fit between dinner and trick-or-treating. Each bite was crunchy, buttery, and sweet, shattering slightly before melting into soft warmth. They were homemade, cheap, and a little chaotic, just like the decade itself. Butterscotch haystacks didn't need frosting, molds, or rules. They were proof that the best treats came from creativity, not perfection. A pot, a spoon, and a few ingredients turned into something that made every kid smile. Mini candy apple bites were Halloween genius made small. You sliced apples into tiny halves or quarters, stuck each one with a toothpick, and dipped them into bubbling caramel syrup that shone like glass. The coating dripped and cooled fast, hardening into a glossy shell that cracked with the first bite. They were tart, sweet, and sticky in all the right ways. Parents made them when full-sized apples felt too heavy or too messy, trading size for simplicity. Some rolled them in crushed peanuts, others in sprinkles, coconut, or even colored sugar for sparkle. They looked like jewels scattered on wax paper, red, gold, and perfect. Kids loved grabbing handfuls, laughing with caramel on their chins and syrup on their fingers. You could eat 3 without thinking and 4 without regret. They tasted like every good Halloween memory, sticky, sharp, and sweet as childhood. Mini candy apple bites turned ordinary apples into magic, proving that joy came best in small, shiny bites. Pretzel rod wands were edible spells wrapped in sugar and shine. Parents melted chocolate in a pan, dipped the long pretzels halfway, and rolled them through crushed candy, sprinkles, or sugar crystals until they sparkled like fireworks. Once they cooled, they looked too good to eat, but no one waited long. The first crunch was sweet and salty, smooth chocolate giving way to the snap of the pretzel beneath. Kids waved them around like real wands, pretending to cast spells before biting off the ends. They were easy to make, fun to decorate, and perfect for last-minute parties. Wrapped in foil or packed into jars, they looked straight out of a candy store but cost next to nothing. Each one came out different, some messy, some perfect, all delicious. Parents loved how fast they came together. Kids loved how fun they were to destroy. Pretzel rod wands were proof that Halloween didn't need rules, just chocolate, color, and imagination. A handful of ingredients, a little time, and a whole lot of joy. Peanut butter kiss cookies were the kind of treat that defined comfort in a single bite. You started with just 3 things: peanut butter, sugar, and an egg. And somehow it turned into magic. The dough rolled smooth in your hands, soft and sticky, and baked into perfect golden rounds that smelled like home. The moment they came out of the oven, a Hershey's kiss went right in the center, sinking gently as the cookie's heat melted its tip into a shiny swirl. The scent of chocolate and peanut butter wrapped the whole kitchen like a blanket. Kids hovered close, waiting for the tray to cool, stealing cookies before they set. Each one was tender, chewy, and warm, part candy, part cookie, all love. They showed up at bake sales, Halloween parties, and potlucks across the 70s, always disappearing first. No frosting, no fuss, just sweetness that worked every time. Peanut butter kiss cookies were the homemade kind of luxury, the kind made from memory and muscle. Every bite reminded you that love could be simple, small, and perfectly sweet. Pumpkin spice popcorn was the scent of fall packed into a single bowl. You popped kernels on the stove, poured melted butter over the top, and dusted it with cinnamon, sugar, and a whisper of nutmeg. The smell filled the room like warmth itself, rich, cozy, and faintly smoky. Each handful was light but full of flavor, sweet enough to make you forget it was just popcorn. Parents made it on chilly October nights, piling it high in bowls for costume parties and movie marathons. It crunched loud, left sugar on your fingertips, and tasted like something straight from a bakery even though it cost next to nothing. Kids carried paper bags of it on Halloween routes, trading pieces for candy. It was simple, satisfying, and endlessly shareable. In every bite, you could taste the season: warm spice, buttery salt, and the faint sweetness that lingered long after. Pumpkin spice popcorn was proof that even the humblest snack could feel like celebration. Chocolate coconut witch's hay was a candy born from creativity and hurry. You mixed shredded coconut with cocoa powder and condensed milk, stirring until it turned thick and glossy. Each spoonful dropped onto wax paper became a little haystack, jagged and perfect in its mess. They cooled quickly, dark and shiny, with a smell that made the whole kitchen feel like a candy shop. Every bite was chewy, chocolatey, and just a little sticky, the kind of sweetness that clung to your fingers. Parents made them last minute before parties, knowing they looked fancier than they were. Sometimes they sprinkled sugar on top for shimmer or added chopped nuts for crunch. They hardened fast, ready before the doorbell rang. Witch's hay was simple, spooky, and satisfying, the kind of treat that turned thrift into magic. It captured everything good about Halloween: fun, flavor, and a little bit of mischief. Candy bar brownie squares were the ultimate mashup of thrift and indulgence, born from leftover Halloween candy and a box of brownie mix. Parents would chop up fun-size bars, Snickers, Milky Way, Butterfinger, and stir the chunks right into the batter. As it baked, the chocolate melted, caramel oozed, and the house filled with a smell so rich it felt unfair. The top came out crackly, the center gooey, every bite different from the last. Kids would peek into the oven, waiting to see if the candy melted or stayed whole. Some pieces turned crisp, others pooled into sticky patches of gold. It was dessert and treasure hunt in one pan. No one cared about presentation. These were cut unevenly, grabbed quickly, and gone fast. They were warm, messy, and joyful, the kind of sweet that felt both accidental and perfect. Candy bar brownie squares turned leftovers into luxury, proof that the 1970s kitchen could make magic from anything. Orange Jello poke cake was sunshine baked into dessert form and pure 1970s cheer on a plate. You started with a simple boxed white cake, baked it golden, and poked holes all over the top with a fork while it was still warm. Then came the best part: pouring liquid orange gelatin across the surface, watching as the cake soaked it in line by line. It turned every layer into something glowing and sweet, like candy trapped inside sponge. Once it cooled, you covered it thickly with whipped topping, hiding the surprise beneath that soft white layer. The first slice always got a gasp, those bright orange stripes gleaming through like Halloween lights. It jiggled slightly, fluffy and cool, the texture unlike any other dessert. Parents loved it because it was easy. Kids loved it because it looked magical. It tasted like orange creamsicle and nostalgia mixed together, sweet and cold enough to make you smile. Served on paper plates at parties, it was messy, happy, and unforgettable. Orange Jello poke cake wasn't just a dessert. It was the taste of the 70s, glowing bright in every forkful, proof that even a box mix could feel like celebration when made with love. Caramel puff corn was the smell of heaven and mischief rising from a single pan. You started with puffed corn, light, crisp, and ready to soak up anything, and poured it into a big roasting pan. On the stove, butter, brown sugar, and syrup melted together into a golden caramel that hissed and bubbled. You poured it carefully over the corn, stirring until each piece shimmered. Then it baked low and slow, filling the whole house with the kind of buttery sweetness that lingered for days. The sound of caramel snapping as it cooled was just as good as the taste. When you broke it apart, it cracked into perfect glossy clusters that shattered in your hands. Kids grabbed handfuls, laughing with caramel on their fingers and crumbs stuck to their shirts. It was popcorn's flashier cousin, richer, louder, a little bit wild. Packed into tins or paper bags, it lasted longer than it ever should have. Each bite was crisp, sugary comfort that made you forget anything else. Caramel puff corn wasn't just a snack. It was pure warmth, homemade joy that stuck to your heart as much as your teeth. Peanut brittle pieces were candy for the brave, a mix of science, sweetness, and risk. You poured sugar, syrup, and butter into a pan, stirring as it bubbled higher and higher until the whole room smelled toasted and rich. Timing was everything. You had to pour it before it turned too hard, spreading it fast across wax paper before it froze mid-air. When it cooled, you cracked it apart with your hands, splintering it into golden shards that sparkled like glass. The first bite was sharp, sweet, and loud, breaking clean before melting smooth. It stuck to your teeth, tested your patience, and left you grinning anyway. Parents made it around the holidays, warning kids to keep their distance while the sugar boiled like lava. Still, the whole family gathered close, waiting for that perfect glossy sheen that meant it was ready. It was a messy ritual that filled kitchens with steam, laughter, and a little danger. No two batches were ever the same, some lighter, some darker, all full of love. Peanut brittle was pure nostalgia, a taste of effort, adventure, and sweet triumph that belonged to a time when candy came from your own hands. Marshmallow popcorn balls with food dye were edible chaos and Halloween magic rolled into one. You melted marshmallows in butter until they turned glossy, poured the syrup over a mountain of popcorn, and stirred fast before it cooled. A few drops of green or purple food coloring turned the whole mix spooky and bright, glowing like something straight out of a monster movie. Parents greased their hands with butter and shaped the warm mixture into sticky balls while kids waited impatiently. Some pieces stuck to the counter, others disappeared before they cooled. Once wrapped in wax paper, they filled party bowls and trick-or-treat bags, soft, chewy, and crunchy all at once. The kitchen smelled of sugar and popcorn, the sound of laughter echoing louder than the stirring spoon. It was a tradition that made a mess worth cleaning up, a recipe that lived on memory alone. Sweet, sticky, colorful, and completely joyful. These were the kind of treats that could only belong to Halloween. Chocolate pretzel spiders were equal parts candy and comedy, the kind of treat that looked too funny not to eat. You melted chocolate in a bowl, stirred in peanuts, and added pretzel sticks for legs before the mixture cooled. The result was a tiny army of spiders, each one wobbly, lumpy, and perfectly charming. Some parents gave them candy eyes, others left them plain. Still, they looked alive enough to make everyone laugh. The mix of salty and sweet hit every craving, the chocolate melting just as the pretzel snapped. They were fast to make, easier to eat, and gone in minutes. Kids waved them around like toys before taking that first crunchy bite. Chocolate pretzel spiders were proof that Halloween didn't need fancy molds or rules, just sugar, creativity, and the joy of making something silly together. Pumpkin pie dip with vanilla wafers was what happened when the 70s met easy elegance. You blended canned pumpkin with cream cheese, sugar, and cinnamon until smooth and velvety. The dip tasted like pie filling, sweet, spiced, and rich enough to feel special. Parents spooned it into bright bowls and ringed it with vanilla wafers, turning snack time into celebration. It was the dessert you could eat standing up, no plate or fork required. The cinnamon filled the air with warmth, and every bite tasted like fall itself. It was quick, festive, and forgiving, perfect for when the clock was ticking and guests were coming. Each scoop felt like a little holiday, simple but full of heart. Pumpkin pie dip made ordinary ingredients feel like a party. Graham cracker haunted houses were the crown jewel of 1970s. Halloween fun, a mix of chaos, candy, and creativity that every kid adored. You started with simple graham crackers, snapping them into crooked walls and uneven roofs, using thick white icing as glue. It never looked perfect, but that was the charm. Kids built mansions, cottages, and crumbling castles, all covered in leftover candy from the trick-or-treat stash. Gumdrops became pumpkins, licorice became fences, and candy corn became roof tiles that slid off halfway through. The icing hardened slowly, leaving sticky fingerprints everywhere. Some houses stood tall, others collapsed halfway through. But laughter always followed. Parents got in on the fun too, building their own wobbly homes beside their kids, sneaking candy as they went. It was a messy, happy ritual that turned a kitchen table into a candy village. The smell of sugar, chocolate, and frosting filled the air like a memory you could eat. No one cared that it wasn't perfect. It was supposed to lean a little, supposed to crumble. That was what made it real. Graham cracker haunted houses weren't just crafts, they were tiny edible memories of joy, proof that the best parts of Halloween never needed rules or precision. Cinnamon sugar donut holes were the kind of treat that turned an ordinary evening into a warm celebration. You popped open a can of biscuit dough, rolled the pieces into tiny balls, and dropped them into sizzling oil. The sound alone, the bubbling, the faint hiss, was enough to make anyone hungry. In seconds, they puffed golden and perfect, bobbing on the surface until ready to scoop. Once drained, you rolled them in cinnamon and sugar, each piece glittering like a treasure. The smell filled the kitchen, sweet and spicy, the kind that lingered on clothes and memories. Parents made them before trick-or-treating, handing them out on napkins as kids wriggled into costumes. They were soft inside, crisp outside, and gone before the plate even cooled. You could eat them by the handful, still warm, still coated with sugar that dusted your fingers. Even when cold, they stayed soft, like a hug from the night before. They were quick, cheap, and unforgettable. A bite of home, joy, and comfort in every piece. Cinnamon sugar donut holes proved you didn't need fancy dough or effort, just warmth, sugar, and a little love. Homemade caramel popcorn bags were more than candy. They were tokens of care, the sweetest kind of nostalgia. You started with a pot of freshly popped corn, still crackling, and poured over hot caramel made from butter, sugar, and syrup. The syrup foamed golden, coating every kernel in shine. It baked slow, turning crisp and glossy, each stir making it smell richer. Once cooled, it was packed into small paper bags tied with string, ready for friends, school fairs, or Halloween nights. The air filled with caramel scent, buttery and deep, wrapping around every corner of the house. It was messy work, but worth it. Kids traded the bags at school, sticky fingers and wide smiles everywhere. It cracked perfectly with each bite, sweet, salty, and comforting. Parents made huge batches, filling counters and cooling racks, always knowing it would vanish fast. Every handful was a memory. Movie nights, porch lights, and laughter echoing down the street. Homemade caramel popcorn wasn't just about sweetness. It was about sharing something made with time and heart. It tasted like love poured straight from the pan. Jack-o'-lantern stuffed peppers turned a savory dinner into a playful Halloween centerpiece. Bright orange bell peppers were carefully carved with eyes and crooked smiles, echoing the classic pumpkin lanterns that glowed on porch steps. The peppers were filled with a hearty mixture of rice, onions, herbs, and sometimes ground meat, then baked until tender while the carved faces softened and glistened in the oven light. As the aroma of roasted vegetables filled the room, families admired the cheerful expressions glowing behind the oven glass. Served hot, each pepper offered a satisfying balance of sweet flesh and savory filling, making it both decoration and meal. Children loved seeing their dinner smile back at them, and adults appreciated the clever blend of festivity and nourishment. Over time, packaged Halloween foods and candy-centered meals pushed aside such creative main dishes, leaving only fond memories of nights when dinner itself joined the celebration and the table flickered with the friendly faces of edible lanterns. By now you might have noticed that not only is the spirit of Halloween a little damper than it used to be, but people are also lazier too. It is not just worries about safety that are keeping more people at home and leading them to spending less time on the streets. Community participation has seen quite the downfall in recent years, and it is a mix of both of these causes. Back in the 1970s, people used to host all kinds of community events, and entire families and neighborhoods would get involved and set the mood across the street for a grand Halloween night. Nowadays, it feels more like a 2-3 hour thing that people go to if their community is even doing anything. And if not, then it is the usual evening trick or treating. Things like trunk or treating have actually become really popular too, both because people think it is a lot easier than walking the whole area with your child and safer too. People hand out candy and set up games in the trunks of their cars, gathering at an agreed-upon parking lot. Then they just host sort of like a book fair, minus the books, but that is the general vibe they put out. It does not really feel like a con or a Halloween party or a themed event, but it has become one of the most common Halloween activities for communities today. What do you think? Would you ever be up for some trunk or treating? So, triple mash with horseradish breadcrumbs is a bit of a funny combination. It's definitely the kind of flavor you would always expect out of a cookbook right out of the middle of the 20th century. The triple mash here is also pretty much just a sign of the times. You take 3 distinctly different vegetables, such as potatoes, and 2 other root ones. Now this could be parsnips, turnips, or whatever else gets you going. All you gotta do is just boil and steam them after. And then, once they're soft enough, turn all of that into a mash. The vegetables actually make an extremely flavorful meal. As true as that is, the real star of this show is the horseradish breadcrumbs. This topping helps add a much-needed crunch factor to dishes, which we all know goes lovely with any kind of potato food. Then you throw in some aromatics and herbs. It's actually one of the best side dishes to serve if you're looking to spice up your potluck, and it's a tried and tested variant that you can't really go wrong with. Plus, the horseradish dips work great around Christmas because it can go with so much more besides just the mash too. The Johnny Marzetti casserole? If you grew up in Ohio, I'm sure you've had this beef and macaroni casserole. Now, this casserole was named after a real person. Johnny Marzetti was named after the brother of Teresa Marzetti, an Italian immigrant who opened a restaurant in Columbus, Ohio in 1896. This dish was the restaurant's most popular offering and soon became the talk of the town. In the 1950s and 1960s, Johnny Marzetti was a common item on school lunch menus in the Midwest. That's because of its kid-friendly ingredients. The best part about this one was that it could be made in advance and baked just in time for dinner, which means you didn't have to visit Grandma for this one every time. The key to a good Johnny Marzetti was the cheese blend. It was typically made with a combination of cheddar, provolone, and Parmesan cheese. Salmon loaf was another dish that went in the same direction as codfish cakes. In today's world where you cannot have any kind of original experience since everything has already been invented and done apparently, salmon loaf was an interesting invention. Back in eras like the 1920s, there was more ground in the food world that was untrodden. People wanted new ideas, and the simple ones, like mixing foods that already work, went to the kitchen first. Among these combos was the salmon loaf. When you think of this, try to imagine a meatloaf replaced with salmon with cracker crumbs on top. A lot of people who thought a meatloaf tasted too gamey found this to be a perfect fit. Like the shoe you just know is right for you at the store, salmon loaf was a hit for many people. Especially in states like Alaska, known for their salmon, it went a bit out of fashion since people wanted to try out salmon in different dishes. Lamb might seem like a fancy restaurant thing these days, but back in the day, it was a total dinnertime MVP. Lamb stew was a fan favorite at dinner parties back in the day, and I get the hype. Imagine the combination of melt-in-your-mouth lamb and an assortment of colorful vegetables like carrots, potatoes, and peas simmered in a rich, flavorful broth just begging to be soaked with some crusty bread. This is a dish that's guaranteed to warm you up from the inside out on a chilly day. Not to mention, it's surprisingly easy to make. Perfect for those nights when you want a delicious meal without spending hours in the kitchen. Just maybe don't tell your grandma you added a sprinkle of your favorite hot sauce. Some traditions are best left untouched. Black walnut fudge squares once offered a dense, bittersweet bite that perfectly matched the deepening nights of late October. Gatherers collected black walnuts from forest floors, cracking the stubborn shells to release the rich, earthy kernels inside. Melted chocolate and sugar simmered together with cream until smooth. Then, the walnuts were folded in to give the fudge a distinct woodsy character. Each square cooled to a glossy finish, its dark flavor balanced by the nut's natural sharpness. Guests at Halloween parties reached for the platter again and again, drawn by the intoxicating scent and the satisfying chew. This treat reflected the season's darker side, a candy that matched the flicker of jack-o'-lanterns and the crunch of fallen leaves underfoot. As store-bought confections grew common, the labor of shelling black walnuts discouraged many cooks, and the recipe quietly disappeared from most family collections. Those who once savored the earthy sweetness still recall the quiet crack of shells and the aroma of chocolate as a highlight of autumn gatherings that celebrated the bounty of wild trees. There are a lot more safety concerns than there used to be before during Halloween. One of the biggest examples of this is that people are not really comfortable letting their kids out alone anymore. Plus, most trick-or-treating does not last as long as it usually did, as you will find out in the next tradition that went away on this list. You know, it was pretty common for parents to just get their kids ready and let them tour the block with their friends. No phones, no ways of contact, nothing like that. People were just okay and comfortable letting their kids wander around their neighborhoods. Nowadays, the entire script has been flipped, and here are some stats to prove it. Did you know that children are twice as likely to get hit by a car during Halloween? This is because of a lot of things and other crimes that people get up to during Halloween, like leggings and driving while buzzed. People are that much more prone to drunk driving or driving while high during Halloween time, and vandalism also sees a similar spike in popularity for a night. In today's world, kids go out earlier and take tags, phones, and glow sticks with them. They are not allowed in darker areas and only get to trick or treat around well-lit familiar ones. It kind of hurts to see Halloween get limited like this, don't you think? Spaghetti pie casserole is probably one of the first instances we have of fusion food overtaking common American interests. While it doesn't really have a well-documented starting point in history like some other burgers and loaves do, it is pretty interesting to see the kind of pipeline this place has taken. The casserole craze in the middle of the 20th century reflected the broader interest of Americans dipping their toes into foreign cuisines, especially whatever the French and Italians had cooked up. Something about their kitchens was irresistible to most people. People seem to believe that this dish got its inspiration from lasagna and baked ziti, which I can't lie makes sense. Both of those have been a big part of Italian-American culture for ages now, and spaghetti, despite not being typical in Italy, has become a really popular choice for American homes. A spaghetti pie itself was purely a home chef classic, though, and it was thanks to how available processed ingredients were becoming. Now that you could just buy pre-made crusts and spaghetti packets, a lot of the work that people associated with it before just went up in the air. You may not believe this, but it was actually easy to prepare for this. Chicken a la Maryland is a fond memory for many 80s and 90s kids growing up. Perhaps it was so popular that the dish was nationally acclaimed and showed up in just about any cookbook you could find. Maryland chicken was named so because it originated from the humble coast side state. Down in Maryland, you could go across the entire state and not miss this dish on a single menu. Not exactly an innovative combo, but who cares about being unique when you taste this good? Fried chicken with gravy, usually served with mashed potatoes or coleslaw, was the American dream if you did not have a white picket fence to go home to. People adored the extra kick it brought to the crispy fried chicken, which was already at the top. The United States of America and fried chicken have such a beloved friendship, and amidst the experimentation, this stuck more than the others. Though now you can't find it in Maryland so often, it is definitely up there in childhood memories. Milk toast was the best comfort food before macaroni and cheese became the king of all comfort foods. This dish, which was as easy as it was old-fashioned, was one of those that families who preferred comfort to glamour would cook for Sunday supper. Here's how it worked. Pieces of bread were baked until they became golden brown and then soaked in warm milk. On top of it, butter was spread liberally, and at times a dash of sugar or cinnamon was also sprinkled. The outcome was a soft, cozy meal that could be described as a hug in a plate. Milk toast was not only a meal, it was a tradition. It was given to kids, the elderly, or anyone who had a cold, and it was the food equivalent of a warm blanket. Though it may not look like much by today's standards, back then it was a luxury to have when ingredients were rationed and money was even more limited. What is interesting is that milk toast has sunk to oblivion, which is rather surprising given the fact that it was popular in the past. Perhaps it is too simple for today's taste buds, or perhaps it is just that we have lost touch with how good simple food can be. In either case, milk toast deserves a second chance, or at least a second glance, for anyone who wants to take a trip back in time and sample a dish that is as mild as it is meaningful. Cheese and potatoes are like a match made in heaven, and Grandma's cheesy, scalloped potatoes was straight out of any cheese lover's dream. So this casserole tastes even better than it looked, and let me tell you, it looked finger-licking delicious. The term scalloped comes from the French word escalope, which originally referred to thin slices of meat. However, in the case of scalloped potatoes, it refers to the thinly sliced potatoes used in the dish. Many grandmas used old-fashioned methods to make their cheesy scalloped potatoes, including hand-slicing the potatoes thinly, layering them with love, and cooking them slowly. Some even added secret ingredients they swear by, like a dash of nutmeg, a hint of garlic, or even a sprinkle of paprika for added flavor. The best part about this one was its crispy crust, and I'm sure you remember fighting all your siblings for the bigger chunk of it. This dish wasn't only tasty, but was also practical. It was a one-pot wonder, meaning it could be cooked and served in the same dish, making cleanup a breeze. I'm sure Grandma loved that. Now, Swiss steak is like a warm hug from the past. This dish is all about slow-cooked, fall-apart tender beef bathed in a tangy tomato sauce. Think slow cooker vibes, but way before slow cookers were even a thing. Now, the Swiss steak is all about patience. The longer you simmer the beef, the more melt-in-your-mouth delicious it becomes. It's also the perfect way to use up that tougher cut of meat you accidentally grabbed at the store. If you grew up thinking this dish was from Switzerland, as the name suggests, now would be a good time for me to tell you your whole life was a lie. This technique of cooking up tender meat came from England, so they're the ones to thank for this meaty goodness. I can just imagine the satisfying experience of cutting through that tender beef with minimal effort. Swiss steak, a dinnertime classic that deserves a comeback. Where do I sign the petition? Pumpkin icebox cake brought a cool surprise to the holiday table, especially in kitchens warmed by busy ovens. Layers of crisp ginger snap cookies were stacked with a creamy filling of whipped cream and spiced pumpkin puree, each layer softening overnight in the chill of an old refrigerator or icebox. By the next evening, the cookies mellowed into a tender cake-like texture, while the pumpkin filling infused them with sweet autumn spice. Families unveiled the dessert to delighted guests who marveled at its elegance despite the effort-free preparation. The first slice revealed neat stripes of orange and brown, a striking contrast against candlelight and paper bats hanging from the ceiling. Its cold, silky bite refreshed guests after long hours of costume parades and games around roaring fires. Over time, the recipe lost ground to quicker packaged puddings and store-bought pies, but those who remember it speak fondly of the quiet thrill that came from revealing a dessert created by nothing more than patience, spice, and the slow magic of a cool night. Just like the decor, the parties we have for Halloween nowadays have really bumped it up several degrees too. People would have some pretty simple get-togethers and community-hosted events like we talked about a while ago in the 70s. A lot of these were not really too flashy or grand and were mostly for their kids so that they could chill out and relax after a long day of hustling candy on the streets. It is a dog-eat-dog, or in this case a pug-eat-pug world out there, and those kids had to get into high gear if they wanted to end up with a big payout at the end of the day. Today, though, not only is there enough for large groups of 24 people, the Halloween parties themselves are a lot more extravagant. Plus, they cater to different age ranges now, too. Adult costume contests are a big craze that people regularly participate in during Halloween, and bars have all kinds of Halloween-exclusive deals and looks so that they can attract more customers. Parties tend to have a proper lighting plan as well as DJs, refreshments, and a lot of drinks available for people nowadays. Stuff on that scale was not so common back then. With baked nectarine chicken salad, you had two things, a few aspects that were really important and simple. These parts of the dish were crucial if you wanted to nail it right. The baked chicken, for example, was a really touch-and-go situation. It was so easy for people to over-season it or under-season it, which would often lead to chicken that didn't sit well with the nectarines. Mostly people would use chicken breasts and thighs so that their flavors could bounce off of everything else while the meat itself would be soft and chewable. This was only boosted by the fact that it was marinated and then rubbed in a lot of herb mixes built to work with nectarines. The fruit themselves have a pretty natural sweetness to them that gives them a unique texture. If you bake them, they sort of soften, and that gives them an entirely new layer of texture and flavor. The nuts and cheese, plus the dressing, are small side elements, but they take a lot of attention to detail to shine. You want to toast the almonds just until they're slightly crunchy, and no more. Goat cheese works best here, or blue cheese if you can't find any. The dressing, a light vinaigrette, is probably the most important part. This is what will decide whether all these otherwise conflicting ingredients come together. It's a funny world, isn't it? A spaghetti pie casserole is somehow easier to make than a simple baked chicken salad. But well, that's the level of skill the recipe wants out of you. While the southern states were enjoying Tex-Mex cuisine, the northern states were all about Italian flavors, and baked ziti was a staple on the dinner table. Now, even with its Italian roots, you wouldn't typically find this one in Italy. This casserole was created by grandmas who were Italian immigrants to the States and adapted traditional pasta dishes to suit the ingredients available in their new country. Baked ziti was pretty much the long-lost cousin of lasagna, with the classic version including ziti pasta, marinara sauce, ricotta, and mozzarella cheese. The ziti pasta used in the dish was tubular and smooth, which makes it ideal for holding onto the sauce and cheese. This one was a hit at Sunday dinners and had everyone coming back for seconds. The tasty meat pie isn't your average store-bought pie. We're talking about a savory masterpiece filled with delicious goodness. This used to be a classic at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners back in the day before hash brown casseroles came to take the cake. But tasty meat pies had their own beauty. Imagine a flaky, golden brown crust with a filling of seasoned ground meat, chopped vegetables like carrots and peas, and a rich, flavorful gravy. The origins of the meat pie have been traced back to the Neolithic period, around 6000 BC. Yeah, even the Egyptians were a fan of this classic. It's perfect for a potluck, a family dinner, or even a cozy night in. The best part? Its portability. Just grab a slice and head out the door. It's the ultimate dinner on the go. Popcorn brittle with peanuts offered a satisfying crunch that combined the warmth of a kitchen with the excitement of October nights. Cooks popped fresh corn until the air filled with its buttery aroma, then stirred in roasted peanuts for a nutty richness. A bubbling syrup of sugar, butter, and a hint of vanilla was poured over the mixture and quickly spread onto greased pans, hardening into a golden sheet that snapped beneath the bite. Every piece delivered sweet caramel flavor with a salty peanut finish, making it a favorite for parties and porch-side gatherings after trick-or-treating. Children competed to break off the largest shards while parents wrapped chunks in wax paper to share with neighbors. The sound of the brittle cracking echoed like dry autumn leaves, adding to the festive atmosphere. As ready-made candies grew more common and easier to buy, this homemade treat gradually disappeared. Yet the memory of that perfect blend of warm syrup and roasted peanuts remains a timeless reminder of how simple ingredients once defined Halloween indulgence. So by now you must have noticed that people seem to put a lot more effort into their Halloween plans back then. There was a massive atmosphere of personalization, you know? Everything you saw, got, or interacted with was either handmade or very intentionally put together. Today's Halloweens do not really reflect that, and a lot of that customized charm of Halloween has disappeared. This is because people don't really make their own stuff anymore, and we do not mean just the costumes. A lot of the treats given out during trick-or-treating were often homemade cookies or caramel apples. It is so much easier nowadays to just get a box of candy door-dashed to you immediately or to do all your Halloween shopping at the grocery store. Sure, that is one pretty efficient way to do it and you get a lot more variety, but the entire bonding aspect of Halloween sort of disappears when you turn it into just a shopping trip. After all, half the fun was in the preparation, right? Southern Soul chili is pretty much exactly what you'd expect that to taste like. You put the words Southern Soul and chili together, and you paint a pretty colorful picture of the Southwest and Texas potlucks. The evolution of this dish is actually pretty closely rooted in Native American, Mexican, and Spanish cultures, though. Over time, it's begun to involve all kinds of things, like beef and chili peppers and even tomatoes and beans. The beans were a pretty new addition, because it wasn't until the Depression that people began to use pinto beans and kidney beans. Even black-eyed beans were things that people took to a lot. Southern soul chili in general was a unique spin that drew a lot of its style from soul food staples and a lot of its flavors from Southern cuisine. You had the chili and the focus on natural ingredients, which was something you'd get from soul food. Still, the smoked meats and sweet potatoes were unmistakable. That was a Southern classic if I've ever seen one. Where else do you see that much smoked brisket being used? Or that much pulled pork? Either way, this makes for one really explosive chili, so try it at your own risk. Remember when Campbell's cream of mushroom soup and canned tuna were the stars of the food aisle back in the day? Well, Grandma took those humble ingredients and spun them into her classic tuna noodle casserole. During the 1950s and 1960s, convenience foods were all the rage, and tuna noodle casserole fit the bill perfectly. It was a post-World War II creation and was whipped up in no time with ingredients already on hand. Plus, it was a classic comfort food that brought everyone together at Graham's dinner table. During the mid-20th century, tuna noodle casserole was a mainstay in American cookbooks and cooking magazines. It was often featured in advertisements and was promoted as a quick and easy dish for the busy homemaker. This one fell out of flavor, but thanks to the recent revival of noodle dishes, we might see this one back on the menus soon. In the meantime, why not dust off Grandma's old cookbooks and bring it back yourself? Witch's brew punch bubbled like a cauldron in basements and community halls when neighbors gathered for Halloween nights filled with homemade fun. Hosts lined big enamel bowls with dry ice, so mist rolled across the table as the sweet scent of citrus and ginger filled the air. Orange sherbet slowly melted into ginger ale and pineapple juice, turning the drink a glowing amber that caught the light of carved pumpkins. Children crowded close as ladles scooped frothy cups that fizzed against their tongues, while parents added a discreet splash of spiced rum to their own mugs. The sound of laughter mixed with the hiss of the dry ice, creating an atmosphere as magical as the holiday itself. Today, bottled sodas and store-bought party mixes have replaced this showpiece, but the memory of a swirling, misty punch shared under paper bats and candlelight remains unmatched. For families who once planned the entire evening around that single glowing bowl, the disappearance of Witch's brew punch feels like the quiet fading of a neighborhood tradition that once defined Halloween gatherings. Another thing that is extremely different and pretty noticeable too is how trick-or-treating is awfully shorter nowadays. Since the theme of the holiday is everything spooky that goes bump in the night, a lot of the suspense and immersion dies down when most of it takes place in the day. So many generations of Americans were used to trick-or-treating well into the night, around like 9 or 10 p.m. and coming back with an entire haul of candy. It was not anything to worry about either. Safety concerns were a lot less severe than they used to be. As a result, people would be pretty relaxed with letting their kids roam around and take in all the wonders of a Halloween night. In today's world, it's more or less the opposite. People take their kids out with them earlier in the day around the evening because of all the rises in kidnappings and safety issues. People are much more afraid, and not of some monster from a Disney movie or Freddy Krueger, but rather of their own neighborhoods these days. It gets kind of sad when you think about it, but maybe there will be nightly trick-or-treat rounds again. Popcorn balls with molasses once filled treat bags with a scent of toasted corn and smoky sweetness that lingered long after the night ended. Families popped huge kettles of corn over wood stoves, letting the kernels crackle and dance until every pot was overflowing. Dark molasses boiled with butter and brown sugar until it reached a sticky stage that coated each fluffy piece. Parents and children buttered their hands and shaped the warm mixture into shining spheres, wrapping them in wax paper before eager trick-or-treaters arrived. The texture balanced crisp corn with chewy, caramelized sugar, creating a candy that tasted of autumn bonfires and brisk October air. Neighbors judged a house by the size and gloss of its popcorn balls, and children compared their haul like trophies at the end of the night. Over time, prepackaged sweets and plastic-wrapped chocolates edged out these handmade treasures, leaving only stories and a faint memory of that smoky kitchen aroma when families worked side by side to make the most memorable Halloween candy. This jellied chicken salad is the best example of how mid-century cooking can be preserved in aspic. It is the kind of thing that happens when someone asks, "How can we make chicken salad even more vintage?" Oh, I know. Add gelatin. This dish starts innocently enough. Chicken, celery, and mayonnaise. But then things take a turn. And then there is unflavored gelatin, which takes the basic salad and turns it into a wobbling tower of savory aspiration. It's kind of like a Jello with meat, but instead of having fruit flavors, it has poultry. The jellied chicken salad was the highlight of Sunday dinners, which, placed in its mold, was displayed on the table. Why? Because it was associated with elegance, or so home chefs thought at the time. It was cold, very manageable, and ideal for making portions for many people. Also, it went well with crackers or a crisp lettuce leaf for that extra special gourmet look. It may not be photogenic today, but jellied chicken salad was at least functional in its context. The gelatin helped to preserve the chicken, and because the meat can be molded easily, it was perfect for potlucks and buffets. Today's people may not fancy it, but there is no doubt that this dish is innovative. It is a relic of a time when people were obsessed with gelatin and a fun conversation piece for anyone willing to attempt it. If these treats bring back sweet memories, share your favorite below and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Halloween nostalgia.